Welcome to the Neon Noise Podcast, your home for learning ways to attract more traffic to your website, generate more leads, convert more leads into customers, and build stronger relationships with your customers. And now, your hosts, Justin Johnson and Ken Franzen.
Hey, Neon Noise Nation. This is the Neon Noise Podcast where we decode marketing and sales topics to help you grow your business. What's going on, everyone? This is Justin Johnson, and with me, I have my co-host, Mr. Ken Franzen. Ken, what's going on for you today?
Not much, Justin. How is everything with you?
Everything is good. I'm doing great. Excited to hear from our featured guest. Today, we will be speaking with Michael D. Prywes. Michael is an attorney in New York State. He hosts the podcast, How I Broke Into and Wrote the Best-Selling Book, The Gasp, How to Seize That Aha Moment and Turn It Into Winning Business. He is a former media professional with a background in film, video, art, music, internet, and law. Michael has served as an advisor to a number of production companies and film festivals. Michael, it sounds like you got a lot of great stuff going on. Welcome to Neon Noise.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Hey, Michael, fill in the blanks on anything I may have missed and share with us a little bit of background.
Sure, I'm an accidental attorney. All right. And I think so law somewhat it became something of a second career to me. I was a film and internet producer for almost a decade, and I discovered that we live in a world where if you don't know law, you can get ripped off. You can make poor decisions. And so I actually went to law school at night while running my production company by day. And I never planned to become an attorney. But what ended up happening is I got recruited right out of law school by my professor who invited me to become a trial attorney, which is the last thing I expected to do. And for good reason, because I ended up hating it, but I got a lot of great experience, and I decided after about 5 years, I wanted to be the attorney that I always wished I had when I was an entrepreneur. And so I made a complete shift, a pivot, and I quit my job at the law firm, and I found a business partner, and I started up a new law firm for artists and entrepreneurs.
Interesting.
And I've been doing that for a few years now, and I wrote a book, basically the handbook for my clients, because what I found was I was getting people who are do-it-yourselfers, and do-it-yourselfers like to do it themselves, including the law, and that's just a mistake. But I also when I'm serving my clients, and now when I'm serving my readers or my listeners, I don't have to just discuss law. I can provide all the wisdom of my own experience and the experiences of my clients. So obviously keeping confidentiality intact, but so I find myself advising about marketing and about sales and about business development and joint ventures and business models that work versus business models that don't work and things like that. So it's really been wonderful. And my clients and readers in other states have really taken to the book. I've gotten some really terrific feedback. And one of the things about the book, as opposed to my law practice, is I serve New York clients only in my law practice. So that's a very limited pool of clients to work with. But when it comes to providing the general information and the questions that should be asked, I can do that for anybody. So that's another reason the book came about.
Very interesting.
The book, though, I mean, so was this just your aha moment for writing the book? Was this just this, I'm getting bombarded about the same questions, or I keep running into the same occurrences over and over again? This needs to be documented because I could record myself with the answer and just, all right, play.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. So talk to us a little bit about maybe, because some of the things you touch on here, and I mean, you've already mentioned multiple things, the business setup, what type of entity to choose, the types of, joint ventures. I think, and you also mentioned in some of the bullet points for the book, raising capital, and protecting your property, and also marketing. So there's some different areas. I definitely want to hit on each of these, but let's start with the main one. For starting a new business, a lot of times we don't have the resources or we feel we don't have the resources to hire an attorney to properly guide us through choosing the right entity and structuring this in the right way, and maybe some of the documents that we should have available and things. Talk to us a little bit about either the direction we should go or some of the biggest mistakes you see made either in a startup or maybe someone that's already going right now that's listening to this that did what Justin and I did and searched Google on what to do. And now we're like, okay, I think that I might need to call someone and make sure I'm properly set up to do what I'm doing because it's going well now and I can afford it.
Yes, I think people are kind of feeling their way around in the dark. And I don't think that there's one answer that fits every single person. And so I think you have to start developing your ability to suss out the people who know what they're talking about and the people who just don't. And I think that that's something I don't know that I, as an attorney or as a friend or a mentor or resource, can necessarily do. But I mean, I've got a very well-honed ability to detect BS. And I think if you can develop that ability on your own or find somebody who has that ability, don't lose those people from your life.
Sure.
As for attorneys, I think in every state you will be able to find a pretty decent attorney who can advise you. But even when that attorney advises you, knowing the questions to ask, also asking the questions, not being afraid and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to rely on what my uncle told me or my friend. And this is true with medicine too. It's amazing to me how many people just choose their doctors based on their friends, as if their friends have any idea of what makes a good doctor. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with a lawyer or an accountant. Really talk to people who really do know what they're talking about, and they're generally publications in various industries where there are the people who are highly regarded, or there are websites now, obviously, with rankings. The only thing I would caution when it comes to online is that whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant, somebody who is more technologically savvy will probably be better able to get the best possible online publicity.
Sure, just because they're more in tune with it.
Right, exactly, and they'll be able to get people to give testimonials. The reality, though, is there are people, anybody who says this is the only way to do something, any attorney is, in my opinion, is selling you a bill of goods. I think there has to be a conversation. So I get a lot of clients who come in and say, oh, I already formed a Delaware LLC. And in New York, forming a Delaware LLC, but doing business in New York, I don't see, usually with most of my clients, the benefit of that. And generally they heard somebody like Guy Kawasaki or Mark Cuban or somebody who's way up the food chain. We're talking, these are people who are dealing in venture capital, high amounts of private equity, Series A, Series B, Series C, but generally people who are bootstrapping a real, a real small business that's going to one day be terrific. Really, you're talking pre-seed, you're talking family and friends, you're talking a much lower level, and so usually in those times, and depending on the state you're in, and I'm talking about the state in the country, not the emotional state. But depending on the state you're in, it may make sense to have an S corporation, sometimes even a C corporation, an LLC. But it's not a fait accompli that you should just be getting some sort of Delaware business entity. And in New York, I advised most of my clients to discuss this with an accountant based on how they're going to be taxed. In fact, there are other conversations to be had based on the city you're in. And New York City has its own special taxes based on business entities. So you really have to ask those questions.
Absolutely. And so when you're looking at, are there any particular questions you can point to when vetting an attorney where you can say this is someone that knows? For instance, when Justin and I began Neon Goldfish, which is our company we were partners in, back in 2007, and even before that, Justin had his own venture, I had my own venture, both in the same line of business. I couldn't find an attorney, an accountant, or an insurance person that knew anything about internet marketing. And
Wow.
that here in the Midwest. And so with that, we were going with, I had attorneys calling me, asking me for advice on how things worked and so on and so forth. And so is it important that they understand, if it's a new emerging industry like the internet was, or the marketing world was changing back then, is it important they understand specifically your industry, or is it important that they understand other things? What are some questions that maybe they could ask?
I don't know that it's necessarily important that they understand your industry, but they definitely have to show a facility for understanding the rules and regulations that affect various industries. And I'll give you an example. I call myself an attorney for artists and entrepreneurs. Most attorneys say I'm an intellectual property attorney, or I'm a business attorney, or corporate attorney, or personal injury attorney. I know that my of counsel is Gordon Firemark, who is in California. He is a well-known entertainment attorney. But that being said, he knows this industry probably even better than I do in many ways. He's been immersed in the online marketing world and representing online marketing clients for a long time. And that's a wonderful thing if somebody does. But because he is in some ways limited in his I guess his positioning as an entertainment attorney, I get probably a lot more, let's say, tech clients who are not necessarily entertainment related, but do make use of a lot of entertainment like things. Because I think there's a real correlation between the entertainment world and the world of online celebrity, online marketing, on online community building, which is a really new world. But I do believe that law firms all over the country are starting to realize that there are innovative attorneys, usually young attorneys, who are making full use of the internet in ways that they never had before. So I think I would not advocate for somebody who just has only worked with online marketing, or if somebody is willing to find out, like you guys had your clients who were attorneys, you should probably, in my opinion, put them through the test. Yeah. What are you willing to find out about what I do so I can make sure that you're the right person for me? One of the problems with law itself is that people who are not lawyers just see lawyers as this monolithic entity, and lawyers are bound by a number of different duties, including duties, an ethical duty and codes of conduct, state laws, and very often federal laws. Now, the fact is that I have mentioned I only represent New York clients. If now that you guys know me, you called me up and said, "Hey, Mike, what's a question I should ask a local attorney, the first thing that I would appreciate is the fact that you recognize that I could give you questions to ask without actually giving you legal advice. And there's a difference between legal advice and legal information. But the reality is that I believe that most people should be hiring a local attorney or an attorney in their state, because there are laws. I'll give you an example. I practice a lot of intellectual property laws. Now, there is federal trademark, but a lot of states have local trademark laws. And so you can, if you're only doing business in your state and somebody else is taking on the same trademark as you, you may want to avail yourself of that state's trademark law. I cannot give somebody in Idaho any legal guidance on their trademark law. I can, obviously, on federal trademark law. So the fact is that most people can't distinguish between a real estate attorney and an entertainment attorney, intellectual property attorney. The fact is that if somebody's looking to engage in some sort of online marketing business, I think that they should be somebody who knows a good amount about intellectual property law, corporate law, and contracts. I would say probably wage and hour and employment law, because the reality is that if you've got people working for you, somebody should be advising you about that. I think that's one of the biggest problems I see especially with early entrepreneurs. They just hire an intern and don't pay that intern any money, or pay that intern who comes in every day at the same time, and pay that intern as an independent contractor, which is misclassification. There are all these little nuances that you should be thinking about. And that's one of the reasons why, again, I put that in my book, because I think my book is actually really good at giving you the questions to ask an attorney in your state.
Excellent. So what are some of the most common mistakes that you see either a business that's starting up make, or maybe one that's already been established and they've been sitting on a mistake they don't even know about? What are some mistakes there that you could say that you've seen in your experiences?
The first mistake I see, and I get this a lot, I get people coming to me and saying, I've got investors already. Because the reality is that you may have money people already. If you've been actually seeking out investment almost every time, you probably have been violating some sort of law. Because the fact is that investments are an exchange of securities, and there are federal and state laws related to investment. Now, there are also laws relating to the founding of a company, but if somebody's making a capital contribution and they're a co-founder of a company, then they're not an investor in the company, even if they are an owner in the company. So the fact is that that's something that is all over the place. And some people won't get caught. But the fact is that if somebody puts in a fair amount of money, it doesn't matter if it's $5,000, $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million. If somebody's putting their money into something and it loses money, there's exposure to liability. This happens all the time, and we don't hear about it, and so it becomes kind of a high stakes game of don't get caught. and that's, in my opinion, that's silly. I think that you can find attorneys, you can find accountants who can help you sleep well at night. So that's one of the biggest mistakes. Another big mistake that isn't really law per se, but when you have enough clients and you've been down this road before, you kind of can tell the things that are just going to die before they grow. And that's generally the result of, I think this would be great, and so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to spend my money on on prototyping and without actually doing the research to see if there's an actual market for the product or service. And I'm not saying don't have faith in yourself. And I'm also this is an issue that comes up a lot with potential clients and some other entrepreneurs that I see, that they don't go through that whole roller coaster zigzag, recognizing that there will be a long time before they see any real movement. It's definitely that hockey stick almost every time with my clients.
Sure. So it's lack of validating the actual concept that even if it might be even long term, that
right.
There's a market, a need for, not this emotional, hey, I came up with this idea.
Right.
I think it's the greatest thing. And my mom, who loves me and says that I'm handsome,
right.
says it's a great idea. And then it flops.
Exactly. Now, as an attorney, I'm going to, I do have to be choosy with my clients because I actually have some pretty offbeat ways of charging my clients. So I have to be very careful with my clients, and that does mean that I will give them my honest opinion, not as an attorney so much as this attorney who has dealt with other people. The reason I say I have offbeat approach to charging clients is I don't charge by the hour. I don't charge for my time at all. And I don't know any other attorney in the country that does this. I charge by the page. And what that means is, I charge in other ways too, but when I'm dealing with contracts, I charge $100 a page to draft an agreement, and I charge $110 a page to review somebody else's draft of an agreement, which is usually worse than mine, which is why I charge more. And with any client, they are always knowing what they're going to be paying me in advance. So I'm inevitably leaving money on the table with every client. But that being said, I really like my clients. I want to have coffee with my clients. I want this to be enjoyable for both of us. So to charge a client for going out for coffee or calling me on the phone would be disingenuous, and I think would really hurt my business model. But I've also tested that out with my clients. And so I think absolutely validating the process from the beginning is important. But I think having people such as an attorney, such as an accountant, who can give you an honest assessment of the direction you're headed for, I think is so invaluable. It amazes me how few people do that. Isn't it better for an entrepreneur who's not sure if they're going in the right direction to get feedback on a regular basis? I think that pays for itself.
Sure. And to touch on your first point you made, where individuals come to you and say, I already have investors. That's problematic because they didn't take the time to formulate the right structure, the right foundation in order to accept those funds, and making sure that they're protected and that everyone understands what takes place and what goes on. And is that accurate?
So yes, but it's actually worse than that. Most of the time, people are breaking the law when they do this, and it depends on which state. There are certain states that have lax approaches to raising money based on that state. My understanding is a state like Washington makes a lot of allowances for people to raise money without having to get SEC exemptions and things like that. In New York, it's a lot stricter, and when you're dealing with investors, you either go through what is known as a portal, a crowdfunding portal very often, which is a very new phenomenon. It's only, I believe, a year and a half old, because this was based on Obama's Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Business Startups, and it took a long time to go through. But there's the concept of donor-based crowdfunding, which is not really crowdfunding at all. It's the Kickstarter or the GoFundMe or the YouCaring, where people are actually they're donating money. They're actually not investing money. And very often there are rewards with something like Kickstarter. But very recently, there's been the crowdfunding for people who are not accredited investors. And these are, and I'll be honest with you, I have not had a client yet to make use of one of these portals. It's called equity crowdfunding. And instead of getting rewards like if it was, or Patreon, that's another one, where you get a record back, a CD back or a DVD back in exchange for your donation, you actually get money back. This is a very exciting new area of fundraising, but still people are doing it through the portals because it's so new for the unaccredited investors, and you have to do due diligence with your net worth, things like that. An accredited investor has a certain net worth, or if they're a couple that together combined, they've got a net worth, not including their home, and it's a process because you want to make sure you don't run afoul of the federal SEC. But there are also what are known as blue sky laws in each state that dictate how you can raise money. But when you co-found, if the three of us wanted to make a business together, and we get our business entity, and let's say it's an LLC, and there are other rules involved, but usually they're not quite as labyrinthine as when you get formal investment than if three founders decide to put in their own money to make something happen.
Okay. So if you're looking at, let's say the three of us, we're going to start a business, and we got figured out LLC's the route we're going to go, and we are looking at, hey, we need money beyond what the three of us can chip in. Say each one of us can drop in $25,000 to get going, but we realize that the $75,000 is really only going to get us going, and for us to really have an impact and to gain the momentum we need in order to be a competitor or to do some R&D or to develop a prototype, that we really kind of need to raise $100,000 more. Okay. What would be the route that you would go, or would you recommend? And I'm going to make you pigeonhole you into something particular, but what would be the recommended route for raising funds? Would you first seek friends and family? Would you use a Kickstarter campaign, or would you look elsewhere?
That would depend on you and your capacity to get money, and or to meet people who can get you money. And the fact is that if you're doing a Kickstarter campaign, you have to be aware of there are liabilities to Kickstarter campaigns. The Kickstarter or GoFundMe, which I actually just tweeted out, I wish people would stop using GoFundMe because they take off the top every time, and a fair amount, as opposed to YouCaring, where they don't take anything off the top. Kickstarter takes off the top too. Kickstarter is here in New York, and they're actually a B corporation in New York, which is a relatively new entity. The fact is that if you can get that money and minus the fees that are going to be taken out, and you can hold on to the equity stake afterwards, I would recommend that to my clients first, probably, because the fact is you get to keep all the income afterwards. It's really a pretty sweet deal, if that's possible. Now, if somebody says, I've got somebody who wants to give me $150,000 right now, and they want a 5% stake in the company, well, then obviously I'm not going to advocate for the Kickstarter necessarily. I mean, we would have to explore what their expectations are, the expectations of the investor. But at that point, you would have to, in my mind, create an investment vehicle. And then you have to do due diligence, even on friends and family. There are different, and this is also discussed in depth in the book. There are different ways of raising money. One is through getting only accredited investors. These are people who are millionaires, and then you don't have to go through all the rigmarole that you would with unaccredited investors. If you're getting a combination of unaccredited investors and accredited investors, you are then going to have to put together what is known as a private placement memorandum, which is like a prospectus, and it's inclusive not only of your operating agreement and your business plan, but also what is known as a subscription questionnaire, in which the potential investor demonstrates that they are sophisticated. They usually have an accountant sign off that they are able to invest and not lose their shirts.
Okay. So it really boils down to, obviously, the situation, and then which situation, that situation, how it best benefits you in the end.
Yes, it's your ability to find the people to get you money, and in what way. The fact is that one of the problems with the idea of having an investor is if you are outwardly seeking out investments, you're actually making a public statement. And you have to be very careful about that, because there are publicly held companies and there are privately held companies. And you don't want to come across as a publicly held company just because you've been tweeting, I've got a great investment for all of you. You have to be very careful with that. And most people don't get that guidance, and they just start raising money and making huge mistakes. And there are other ways too. And we could go, again, this could be a rabbit hole, but there are ways to raise money through loans that ultimately become equity. I'm sure you guys have heard of the convertible notes and safe agreements and things like that, the KISS agreements. But the fact is that most people just come in with an agreement that they downloaded from the internet, and they just start trying to raise money, and that's just the wrong way to go.
Absolutely. And I can imagine you've seen some cases where it's family and friends that invested, that people say, well, this is my brother, or this is my mom, or this is my best friend from college who was the best man at my wedding, and we have an understanding that what's going to happen, and so on and so forth, probably go into that agreement without much in place, and that probably turns sour quick in bad situations, right?
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that I think attorneys serve as very well, and as lookers into the future, seers into the future. We've seen all this. This is why, if, for instance, you're putting together a business, I always advocate for what is known as a buy-sell agreement. Business divorce is much more common than marriage divorce. The reality is that most things in life are not meant to last forever. So you have got to imagine the worst case scenarios. And that's true not only for attorneys, for any person starting up a business. More likely than not, you will not last forever. So what happens when everything goes wrong? Sure. What are you going to do?
Now, as we grow our businesses, we sometimes start off by ourselves. Like Justin and I we were one-man shops, and then we came together and we were a two-man partnership. But then we had to hire an employee. Mm-hmm. And we had to hire another employee. And we didn't know what the heck we were doing. We did actually start talking to some professionals at this point. But what are some pitfalls in bringing on employees? You made mention once before about an intern you're bringing on, but paying them as an independent contractor, which is a misclassification of how you're using them. How are some business owners, entrepreneurs misusing or breaking the law, or maybe things that they don't understand they should be doing with employees in the hiring and also the firing of them?
Right. and this can become really problematic, because if you go about the hiring or firing of somebody and you don't have much money in the bank and you get this wrong, they can shut you down. And in fact, this is one of the things about an attorney that can be very useful to a business owner from the beginning. If you're going in starting up a business and you first go to an attorney who understands startups and understands just the way things work, I think you can foresee a scenario where you may have multiple business entities, one for the intellectual property, one for the operations of the business. But in addition to that, I actually usually advocate my clients punt, which they rarely do, despite my best advice. I personally believe that the best course of action is spend a little more money and go through a payroll co-employer, because then the onus is on them to make sure that everything is going accordingly. And I'm talking like an ADP or a TriNet, where they will work with small businesses. And yes, you pay a little more, but they can serve as a co-employer. They've got not only a wealth of information about human resources, but also what to do in various scenarios where somebody is not doing the right thing. There's so many pitfalls related to hiring and firing, civil rights laws, wage and hour requirements that are nitpicky that you weren't thinking about. All these things, having somebody there to guide you by the hand and say, well, this is a possible outcome and that's a possible outcome. I actually think in those cases, I would rather have a client hire a payroll service than me to oversee all the labor agreements and everything else, only because I think you're getting more people who can, the larger the number of eyes there are on agreements and situations, I think the more likely you are to not make these mistakes. That being said, I talk to people all the time where I can't believe that an attorney didn't flag something. I'll give you an example. I mentioned this, I believe, in my book, and definitely in an article. If you've got somebody with a medical condition in your office and you become aware of that medical condition, you should be speaking to HR and the attorney right away to make sure that you don't screw up and make any mistakes related to a disability.
So you're talking like if they have like a peanut allergy, if I become aware of that and I understand that and I bring some paydays in for the office.
It could be that. It could be let's say somebody's got a chronic illness and they're out for an extended period of time because of that chronic illness, and then you fire that person because that person wasn't doing their job. Well, the fact is that person could come around and sue you for violations of their rights as a disabled person. It could have to do with mental illness. If somebody's depressed or has something like ADHD or different things that can take them away from their work. But if you fire them without having prepared for all the different outcomes from firing that person, you can find yourself in a world of trouble.
So talk to me a little bit about that then, because when you are looking at or facing, or you find a particular employee that is not performing to the level that you like, it's like, oh, great, I'm thinking that we're going to have to let go of so-and-so. And I always say, slow to hire, quick to fire. But the quick to fire thing scares the crap out of me because you hear stories out there like, so-and-so fired someone. How do you go about properly, if we got an instance where somebody has a chronic illness and you know about it? I think that was a caveat there, is that you know about it. But what about just a standard employee, or what is the proper way that an employer should approach terminating an employee?
Well, and I think this gets to the heart of everything a good small business should have, which are systems. And I think that's something you can develop with a payroll service, which a fully staffed payroll service that has an attorney, and accountant, and also, I've mentioned it before, usually an insurance policy. And usually they are eager to see you not sued. So they will guide you through this. But an employee manual, employment handbook, really role playing and figuring out different scenarios in which interviewing is improper versus proper, creating a disciplinary procedure, and usually that involves writing and discussion. But they're having policies for every step of the way, and developing those policies is very important in order to get this right. And I know it seems like overkill sometimes when you've got a bootstrapped company, but the fact is that people who get sued are generally more successful than people who don't get sued. And what I mean by that is you may get sued by somebody and get shut down, but usually there's a perception that somebody's going to get money. And that means that even if you're not successful now, you clearly envision a time when you will be financially well off. And it's at that time when you get screwed over. So this is very preventative, in my opinion.
And so having these policies in place, this documented approach, and how you manage these different scenarios that could lead to a termination of an employee would be the first step. And then I guess obviously adhering to those policies and procedures.
One of the other things that needs to become apparent, even if you're a solo, like you're doing everything by yourself, you need to get other people on board. Nobody is self-made. And having other people's input, especially people who have an understanding of employment and labor law, wage and hour, even people who have understandings of things like ERISA, which I got to be honest, that's not something I ever deal with. But if you ever find an attorney who does, that's a good thing, because these are federal policies that very often have an enormous impact on employment. People who have an understanding of HIPAA, which is the Health and Privacy Act. The more knowledgeable people you start bringing on to be not obviously on an everyday basis, but at least go-to people in a variety of fields, I think is key. Now, I pitch myself to small businesses as a mini general counsel, a mini in-house counsel for these companies. The reality, though, even with the big companies, is that the general counsel doesn't handle things like litigation. They pass you off to somebody else. So that's the way you should be looking at these things at a certain point. So I always tell my clients, when it's time for you to go Series A, I'm going to pass you off to a different attorney who has far more resources than I do. But different attorneys assess their own abilities differently.
Absolutely. Now, what about independent contractors, subcontractors, 1099 employees? The general idea and the use of them, I think that it's how you leverage or dictate their time and things along those lines. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and where you get yourself in a
yes, and
in
this
a pinch
this
there?
actually has come up quite a bit lately, especially with big companies, but even with little companies, most people 1099 too often. I think it's with independent contractors, it's about the results. It's not about the process. So, and it's not really about time usually. So, for instance, you can have a temporary employee for 3 days, but if you say, I want you here at this time, and I want you doing X, Y, Z during this time, that person's an employee, not an independent contractor. Almost always mess that up.
Okay.
If you say, I need this done for me, and I don't care how you do it, I don't care where you do it, I don't care what you wear, you can do it in your underwear. As long as you get it to me by this time, that's results oriented, and that person's likely to be an independent contractor. Not always, but different states have different rules about independent contractors versus employees. The big difference with employees is that there are a whole load of benefits that are attached to employees, and a lot of employers don't want somebody to be an employee. But this is, again, on a case-by-case basis, and this is a reason why I recommend a payroll service, because you don't want to constantly be wondering if you're doing something wrong that can bite you later. Workers' comp. Very often, you will find workers' comp claims made by independent contractors who were classified as independent contractors, but should have been classified as employees.
Sure. So the end of it all is really not it's result oriented versus being overly detailed on where they're going to be and what they're going to do.
It's actually usually it's a question of control over the act of working versus the results of the work usually. That being said, one of the wonderful things about the internet is the growth of platforms related to all these different matters. So, for instance, you've got freelancers on Upwork, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, but that there you've got a middleman, and that middleman makes sure that you're dealing with contractors and not employees. I like to remind most of my clients when they're thinking about different ways to make money that the richest person to come out of the gold rush was Levi Strauss, who sold the jeans. And the fact is that most like Kickstarter campaigns, I'm sure, don't do very well, but Kickstarter always makes their money. And I'm sure Upwork is making their money too. The fact is that platforms for XYZ are usually doing better than the XYZ itself.
Without a doubt. Yeah, platforms like Upwork or Fiverr is another popular one.
Now, I will say with Fiverr and Upwork, one of the things you have to be careful about is that I had this happen with 99 Designs for my book, actually. And I mentioned this in my book. 99 Designs, I was dealing with a Greek designer. And people in other countries are not necessarily beholden to American intellectual property laws. And so one of the worst things that can happen on a Fiverr or an Upwork is intellectual property infringement, where they're really using other people's work, and ultimately you're on the hook for it, even though they may have even signed off. I mean, the fact is you're not going to be able to get somebody in another country to adequately indemnify you if they do something wrong. So that's one of the ways where you can get pinched.
Absolutely. And is that just a risk that you take by using one of these platforms?
I think it's only if you're not doing further due diligence. I would not depend on the contract with one of these platforms when you cannot really go after somebody in another country usually. Sure. So, I mean, I think the rating systems are one way to deal with that, but I think you also have to do a little bit of your own investigation. You know, you get music there, and I can't think of something off the top of my head that's like Content Key, but if you put it through something like a Content Key and something pops up, then you may want to think twice before using that music. If you're using an image, I can tell you that this is a cottage industry where people are using copyrighted photography. And years later, they may not even have that website anymore, but they get an email from Getty Images demanding money. And are you going to fight Getty Images? They will come after you.
Sure. Yeah, we've seen some of that happen where it's been websites from that we've built that are live, and they're like, "Hey, I got this letter," and I'm like, "This is the site you had before you started working with us," and there was an image on that site, or it's an image they provided, a blog post they published. Yeah, that they published, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I grabbed that off Google. That's not right." Whoops. No,
that was
and that is someone else's property.
Yeah. And so, that letter is legit.
It was legit.
Yeah, it's and now I don't know if you know this, but Getty is actually experiencing this themselves because they've been using this photographer's work that she donated to the Library of Congress, and they considered it public domain, but they weren't public domain. She just donated it, and so this photographer, I don't know what the status is, but she's sued for like $1 billion.
Good for her.
That's what I say too.
Right. So the shoe is on the other foot. Right. Exactly.
Yes.
But that being said, people cannot just take images off of Google Images and expect that to go unnoticed. I know that I do trademark and image monitoring for my clients, and I got to tell you, I'm going to make my clients aware when somebody's out there infringing. It's my job.
Now, let's chat just a second about
absolutely
the marketing and advertising world, because it's changing so much.
Yes.
The internet's flipped this upside down. I've read an article yesterday about how they're cracking down more on influencer marketing and how the big brands are using influencers, and how they're disclosing that it's a paid for endorsement versus a legitimate organic endorsement. And let's dive into this a little bit and talk about how different the world is and what are some of the things that a business owner and entrepreneur should be mindful of when marketing, advertising their business, not only in digital, but even traditional means, TV, radio, billboards, but the approaches that they should take or where they should really be cautious.
Yes, I think this is very important, and this would be a good time to talk to an attorney when you're going to do a marketing blitz. You need to make sure that you're on the up and up. I know that there are different areas where you can get tripped up, including the Federal Trade Commission can find out about a claim that's not accurate. You can have private lawsuits where, there have been a bunch of lawsuits related to things like organic or natural or made in America. All these things, whenever you're using a qualifier to highlight what your product or service can do, you have to make sure that it can, because you can still find yourself in a world of trouble. So for instance, and it can vary state to state too, for attorney advertising, I mean, I know other attorneys who don't follow the rules, and they should, but the fact is an attorney in New York should have on all advertising, attorney advertising. Prior results don't guarantee future outcomes. That's required of every attorney in New York for any advertising, because you cannot guarantee future outcomes based on prior results. I see this a lot, especially on online advertising with online courses, and I've gotten so-and-so. It's a mistake, and people get caught, and people get in trouble. Sometimes people get bankrupted. I think the first thing you have to think about when you're doing advertising or marketing, whether it's comparison advertising or just traditional advertising, is make sure every claim you make is accurate and true. But even before that, I would say go find a local attorney who knows about business, small business, and find out if this advertising is okay. When you've got somebody else giving you permission to do the advertising, you should go that route, because trying to figure out if it's worth it can really create a headache that you don't want.
Absolutely. Now, the claims that are made, you mentioned the online courses. What were some of the instances there? It's people saying that they were going to increase XYZ by ABC, or what was the deal there?
So I'm thinking of one person, and it's been a couple of years since I've gone through the details, but one well-known online celebrity was very salesy and said, how can you afford not to, something like, how can you afford not to go with this program when I've gotten so many people millions of dollars, something crazy like that. But the fact is that when you're talking about prior results, you're even talking sometimes about testimonials, you've got to be very careful. I can also say that I don't go around calling myself an expert, because I'm not allowed to. Attorneys in New York, at least, and I believe in California, are not allowed to call themselves experts or specialists. People do, but they can get caught, and they can get sanctioned. So it's about paying close attention to what you want to do. And I think that should be part of your own internal audit. Every time you do something, what am I saying here? What can I get in trouble for here? If you're going through worst case scenarios every step of the way, I think you're probably going to be in a lot better shape.
Sure. You just check down, does this seem misleading, or or could it be perceived as misleading, I guess?
And I haven't read it, but I've had a lot of people, I've read an article about it, a couple of articles about it, and I've had people tell me this is a wonderful book called the Checklist Manifesto. And I used to work in trial law, and this is when I read about it. People find results when there is a checklist that they actually go through, not just in their head, but it's on paper, and they have those questions, and they go through it step by step before engaging in potentially risky behavior.
Sure.
In the case of the Checklist Manifesto, this was about surgeries in hospitals. The fact is this is what you want your doctor to do, because you don't want them to make a mistake. You want them to go through, and this is what airlines do. This is what you should do with your business. Have a series of questions that you go through for every different scenario, and I think you're going to be in a lot better shape.
Absolutely.
Great idea.
So, are there any myths out there that you give you an opportunity in your universe and that you operate within that you'd wanted to debunk at all? Anything that people or misleading ideas that you say, all right, people, this is not true. You cannot do X.
I wouldn't want to do that, because I think we would have done that with something like Airbnb, where I can't even imagine inviting people into my home to live there for a short period of time. What I would say is that there's the myth that, well, I mentioned before the myth of the self-made person, the person who does it all on his or her own. There are always other people who have helped you get to where you are. I think there's the myth of the overnight success. I have my own podcast called How I Broke Into, and I have interviewed a bunch of people who will argue that there is no overnight success. There's only been one person I've interviewed who found success relatively quickly after college in an entrepreneurial world, but he wasn't seeking it out. He kind of stumbled upon it, and B, he kind of lost a lot of it and had to find his way back to that success, because I think so much of the success comes from the up and down experiences. And so I think the myth of the overnight success is overblown. Now, granted, we do get a lot of people in their teens and 20s who are just hitting it big. But I would even argue that so much of that comes from their experiences as kids and what they prioritized. I'm one of those people who doesn't believe in goals. And I've said this a number of times, and people kind of look at me side-eyed. But I believe in priorities based on your values. I believe in certain milestones, but when you're talking about goals, it's binary. It's either you've achieved a goal or you haven't achieved a goal, and you haven't opened yourself to the opportunity of other outcomes that may be even better than the goals you set for yourself.
What was the name of your podcast again, Mike?
How I Broke Into.
And what is that? What is the premise of your podcast? What does it dive into?
I interview artists and creative entrepreneurs about what got them to where they are today, what it was that they did. And I got to tell you, I've interviewed some of the most impressive people. I interviewed Reed Morano, who's nominated for an Emmy Award. She was the director of photography on the show Vinyl, but she was the director of A Handmaid's Tale. I've interviewed Hal Elrod, who ultimately wrote the back testimonial on my book, and he's an amazing person. I've interviewed a sculptor whose work is in the Smithsonian and in MoMA and at Cooperstown, and she's in her 80s, and getting that perspective is important. But nobody, even when people break in quickly, nobody has just an upward trajectory. If you want to talk about a myth, the myth of just a trajectory rather than just something that goes all over the place is just not accurate, in my opinion.
See, Justin, we're doing it right.
Yes, you are. Enjoying the ride.
That's right. It's been a fun ride, but it's been all over the place. And then I don't know. I think that's the fun of it all. But a little bit of boredom upward trajectory here once in a while wouldn't be so horrible. So outside of the book and everything you have going on with your practice and the podcast, what else do you have that's got you really excited right now, or what do you have coming up in the future that you really has you pumped up?
I'm working on another book that's actually not law related, but it is based on lessons that I've learned that I'd like to pass down to my kids. One of the things that it does show up in my book that people really respond to is something that I coined as the team budget. And that's time, energy, emotion, and money. That we generally budget for money and sometimes for time, but almost never for energy and emotion. And I have had pretty productive output, but it's generally been explosive in windows of time. 1 or 2 hour increments, I can produce a whole lot. I think it's important to be able to deal with your time, your energy, and your emotion just as much as your money in order to craft the days, weeks, months, and years of your life. And especially when you're like me, where you have a family and I'm married. I've got 2 boys. I'm also now, I was just recently elected to my local board of education. And when you have all these things, people talk about work-life balance. I don't think it's about balance, but I do think it's about construction and budgeting. And so and really letting giving yourself downtime. I mean, if you're going to burn out if you're just putting pedal to the metal all the time. So that's the name of the book right now, tentatively, is Life is Not a To-Do List.
I like it.
Very cool. When's that going to come out?
I'm hoping by the spring of 2018.
Very nice. Good stuff. All right. Hey, what is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
My overall website is michaelprywes.com. My law-related website where I post my articles is newyorkstartupattorneys.com, which is a mouthful, but that is the work site. And I've got at Michael Prywes as my personal Twitter feed, at NYStartupATTYS as my law-related Twitter feed, and
perfect. We will put all of that in the show notes. Hey, Michael, before we say goodbye, what is one piece of parting advice that you would give to our listening audience?
One piece of parting advice is really enjoy the ride. Just soak it all in. We only have one life to live.
Love that. Enjoy the ride.
Awesome.
All right, Neon Noise Nation, we hope you enjoyed our conversation today with Michael. Michael, again, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really enjoyed your time.
Thank you so much.
The show notes, absolutely. The show notes from today will be available at neongoldfish.com/podcast. Until next time, this is Justin, Ken, and Michael signing off. Neon Noise Nation, we will see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Neon Noise Podcast. Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, please subscribe, share with a friend, or write a review. We want to cover the topics you want to hear. If you have an idea for a topic you'd like Justin and Ken to cover, connect with us on Twitter at Neon Goldfish or through our website at neongoldfish.com.